Hello everyone, Darcinovi here. This is my review of one of DC's most famous story arcs, of course, one of Batman's most famous ones in the 80s, Death in the Family. Of course, this has two story arcs, pretty much, the Death in the Family and the Lonely Place of Dying arcs, but I'm going to talk primarily about the Death of the Family story arc. This story arc is, in my opinion, one of the biggest events in DC's history, and one of the most memorable deaths. I know deaths in comics don't really mean much anymore, but at the time, it meant something. When a character died, they didn't they didn't just come back to life like within a year, of course, until the 90s happened, but that's a different subject for another day. Characters that died in DC Comics throughout the 80s. I'll talk about this comic in the future. Barry Allen stayed dead for over 20 years. Jason Todd stayed dead for 20 years. Spoilers for a 30-year-old comic. And many more. And this pretty much is, even though I do believe, even though he was brought back, I still think this death matters still. Because this highlights one of Batman's biggest failures. And of course, there's some little history about the death of Jason Todd. There was a hotline where people were able to vote if they wanted him to live or wanted him to die. And Jason Todd wasn't popular with comic book readers at the time. And I can't comment on that because I haven't read any comics that featured Jason Todd at this period. But I do know a lot of the reader base did not like him. So they killed him off. Of course, he would come back later and he'd be beloved now. A lot of people seem to love him now, but they hated him back then. This is a comic that you can easily find for a really good price. The Death of the Family story arc. This is my first Batman comic I've read. I bought this years ago, still in good condition. It's a really good comic. It really is. You know, even if you've never read a Batman story before, I feel like this is one of the good starting points, actually. There's the Killing Joke, there's the Dark Knight Returns. But this is pretty good, honestly. And I can't say a single thing that's negative. The artwork, of course, I've mentioned this in a lot of my reviews. There's just something about 90s artwork. Well, not 90s, 80s. Sorry, my mistake. That I just absolutely love. It's just amazing. I just cannot, you know, just say enough. And one of the most iconic panels in comic book history. I could see why the 90s weren't that much innovative in terms of comics. This is pretty good. This is one of the most iconic comic book panels of all time. I felt this was really good. Really, this story arc. This is pretty much. This is one of the occasions where Batman almost broke his no kill rule. And this is one of the best Joker moments, too. If you're a fan of the Joker, this is a really good Joker story. Of course, the follow up story arc in this, A Lonely Place of Dying. This pretty much is Bruce dealing with the loss of a partner and fighting alone. This would feature the first appearance of the third Robin, Tim Drake. And I'm not going to talk about much what happens here, but basically by the end of this arc, Bruce is still hurt with the death of Jason, but he's open to take a new partner. I know I glossed over that arc, but to be honest, Death in the Family, which is the one I mainly touched over. Of course, A Lonely Place of Dying is a great read as well. Maybe you get it with this trade. The impact this comic has had on, the other comics, in the DC universe was big. It really was. I mean, the 80s and the 70s, they had balls back then, unlike they do now. DC and Marvel. When they killed a character, they usually kept them dead for a while. They didn't bring them back like a few months or weeks later. Death back then meant something. And I'm curious what readers thought when Jason Todd was killed off. Because this was before my time, honestly. Under the Red Hood, which I will be reviewing next in Batman stories, but that may be my next review or The Dark Knight Returns. Either way, Death in the Family, masterpiece. A great story, especially if you're looking to read some classic DC comics that isn't the New 52 universe, and you want to read classic, DC stories, or you just want a good Batman story, and you don't know where to start. This is one of the ones I recommend. This, The Killing Joke, The Dark Knight Returns, and Red Hood or various others. They're a great place to start, but I recommend Death in the Family as a good Batman story to start with. And that's pretty much it for my review. Next time, we'll talk about The Dark Knight Returns. Because we all love our Elseworld stories. Well, except a certain someone, but fuck him. He's irrelevant. Later, guys.